November. Florida is one of only 6 states to gain House seats after the 2020 census. In New York, which lost a seat, a chaotic redistricting process has created contentious primaries among the Democrats and perhaps opened the door to some Republican gains. Democratic voters in Florida have picked their nominees for governor and senator to go up against Republican incumbent Governor Ron Desantis and Senator Marco Rubio. Democrats, of course, would like to win the governor's office, but if not, they'd like to soften up DeSantis, who's been trying to build a national profile ahead of a potential presidential run in 2024. In New York, 2 longtime Democratic incumbents go head-to-head. Representative Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney. The 2 are now facing off in the 12th congressional district. Only one will survive. And a special election in New York's 19th congressional district is getting national attention because Democrat Pat Ryan is facing Republican Mark Molinaro in the Republican-leaning district, and both are trying to use the race as a measuring stick on what voters care about more broadly. Is it the economy or abortion rights? Tonight, we'll have results from those states, but more importantly, we're going to look at the themes that have been running through these contests and those that have come before it, and what those might mean for the midterms. They're just 77 days away. Some of those themes are turnout, enthusiasm. What's going to be the role of abortion? Will the Supreme Court ruling overturning Roe versus Wade help Democrats? Will President Biden's low approval numbers, broadly and specifically on the economy, be too much for Democrats to overcome? And will this be the first midterm to be a referendum on the former president? Donald Trump, remember, is still the leader of the Republican Party. Now, the important numbers to keep in mind. Republicans only need 4 seats in November to win control of the U.S. House and just 1 seat to shift control of the U.S. Senate. With all that on the table, here's who's joining me this evening. The amazing CBS News political team here in D.C. We have Nicole Killian, Ed O'Keefe, and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Robert Costa and Enrique Acevedo are in Florida. Scott Mcfarland's in New York. And Director of Elections and Surveys Anthony Salvanto is at CBS headquarters in New York. Also, we'll be checking in with all of them. But first, we're going to get to some results. We already have some numbers, so let's take a look at what we've got so far. Who's going to go up against Ron DeSantis? Well, we have a projected winner. Charlie Crist, who held that job before as governor of Florida, will now go up against Ron DeSantis. He beat Nikki Fried rather handily in that race. So now we'll see if the governor can get his job back. In the Senate race to go up against Marco Rubio, Val Demings really didn't face competition. And in fact, we now project her as the winner. 84% of the vote there, with 90% of the vote total coming in. She's got that locked up. She will now go off, start her campaign. I think she launches a bus tour this evening to start her campaign in earnest against Marco Rubio. Chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa is in Florida, where the 2 biggest names in the Republican Party could be headed towards each other in a head-to-head matchup. Former President Donald Trump and Republican Governor Ron DeSantis are the 2 frontrunners for the 2024 GOP presidential nomination. So, Bob, what do you make? Let's start with Crist and his victory in Florida. What do you make about that in terms of his contest against DeSantis?
John, so good to be with you tonight here from Palm Beach, Florida, just steps away from Mar-a-Lago. But the story tonight is about Charlie Crist, now a Democratic congressman. But I keep thinking back, John, to about 2010, more than a decade ago, when Charlie Crist was a rising Republican, seen as a possible presidential contender. But he changed parties after Marco Rubio started to rise on the Florida scene. Now a Democrat. And Democrats chose tonight to nominate Crist here in Florida for this gubernatorial run because they believe he is best positioned to run against a rising star in the Republican Party, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. To me, as a political reporter, what we're seeing here tonight is a reiteration of the Biden model of Democratic politics. The way Joe Biden ran for president in 2020 was reaching out to traditional Democratic voters, having a more moderate message as a way to carve out support in more red states across the country. That Biden model seems to be the Crist model here in Florida. They're not going with the more progressive in persona, in rhetoric, and at times policy, Nikki Fried.
All right, we're going to be checking in with Bob all night. Thank you, Bob. CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto joins us now. Anthony, Florida has been changing a lot since the last time Crist was governor. It's been trending red ever since Obama won it in 2012. Give us a little history here about Florida and how it's changed and what it's going to look like for these two important races, the governor's race and the Senate race.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've got 10 years on since former President Obama won this state. Here's something I don't say very often, though. Pretty straightforward, easy calls in Florida, right? You've got Val Demings at 84%, like you pointed out, and, of course, Charlie Crist as well, with a fairly easy win. The answer to your question on why Florida has trended red starts first. Let me show you the last governor's race when Ron Desantis won. Very close, as many races in Florida are. Look at the deep, deep red throughout every place except the major cities, except Orlando, except Miami. That tells you a story, which is that in suburban areas, in rural areas, these places have been going heavily Republican. They've also been growing as people have moved into the state, as the population has grown. And then the other part of this, and this also tells part of a national story, I'm going to show you the Hispanic vote in Florida, such a central part of the demographic makeup of Florida. Look at how it has trended, at least in the last two presidential elections, from a pretty comfortable 62% for Democrats down to 53%, a much more narrow win for Democrats in the last election. That's something I think is going to be a focus because the Hispanic vote, not just in Florida, but you're going to look at Texas, you're going to look at Arizona, in many states, is going to be a key to the elections this year, and can Democrats hang on to what has been a substantial part of their base, John?
Right. All right, Anthony Salvanto, thank you. Now we're going to turn to the table here. Okay, we got two big and important races in Florida. Nicole, let me start with you. Val Demings is running up against Marco Rubio. Give us your sense of what she faces in this state. As Anthony said, it's a red state. How do you think she's positioned against Rubio?
Well, I think in talking to her campaign, I think aides are pretty clear-eyed about the numbers and know that they have an uphill battle. At the same point, they feel very confident in the trajectory of this race. They feel that she has been able to make gains. And really, we have seen her run a general election race from the outset. I mean, tonight she had three challengers. And as you saw, trounced them 84%, at least according to the latest numbers that we have. And so from that standpoint, they have always made Marco Rubio their target. And the Rubio campaign knows that. And that's why, they tout all these law enforcement endorsements that Marco Rubio has received because they know they're going up against this former Orlando police chief. We know in terms of Val Demings, she has really been touting those credentials, really promoting this message of law and order at a time where we know Democrats are getting hit on the message of being soft on crime. So again, it appears to be a competitive race, could be going forward, and certainly something to keep our eyes on in the next couple of weeks.
Ed, either pick up on what Nicole's saying about the Senate race, or let's just go right to the governor, because races for governor in Florida are close. Yeah. It was very close, DeSantis' last one. But DeSantis is riding two horses here. He's got his governor's race, and he's thinking about the big house.
It's as if you heard what Charlie Crist said earlier tonight in accepting the nomination. Governor DeSantis only cares about the White House. He doesn't care about your house, Charlie Crist said. Pretty effective line when you know that the guy in office right now is clearly eyeing a bigger office. He also called him a, quote, wannabe dictator, which is a line you could argue that's similar to the argument Republicans have been making about Democrats in that state for so long, that they're socialist, that they're Marxist. Well, he can turn around and say, now, look at what this governor's tried to do in terms of running COVID policy, running the media out of Tallahassee. He's a dictator. Will that work? We'll see. But a 1 to 2 point race is normal in Florida. That's what both parties are now anticipating. And wouldn't it be something if Charlie Crist could kill the giant before he gets to run for president in 2024? There are Democrats out there tonight believing, once again, maybe they're sniffing the salts, who knows, that they can somehow pull this off, even though, as Anthony showed us, the numbers have been trending Republican for the last several years. Right,
exactly. Putting money on Florida for Democrats has led to a lot of tears recently. Caitlin, this idea of dictator is interesting because, of course, DeSantis has built part of his support on the idea that on COVID he was right, as his supporters see it, and he didn't lock down the state, and that's interesting. It's also on the table in the governor's race in Michigan, that idea that COVID lockdowns were too strong. Give us your sense of either of these two races in Florida.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about the governor's race is that for Ron DeSantis, he is able to use that perch, use those levers of government to really position himself at the forefront of Republican Party politics and at the center of culture wars. I mean, he's looking at these other potential 2024 candidates, some of whom are in the Senate and can't really do much. Others, like former Vice President Mike Pence, who's out on the trail, has to be attached to the former president who doesn't really like him much anymore. Ron DeSantis can be the one who says, look, I'm kind of Trump without the baggage, and I've actually enacted all of these policies that you guys are talking about, especially on curriculum, education, COVID, you name it, going on to issues of gender, race, kind of running the gambit there. He is kind of essentially saying, look, I've done it there in Florida. And what he's done that's really important also is that he's pushed congressional maps in the state. Remember, redistricting has happened. He pushed congressional maps that favor Republicans. When you look at some of these Democrats like Christ, who's leaving his seat, Stephanie Murphy, who's leaving her seat, those are now more Republican districts. And he also eliminated, or the map that he pushed, eliminated 2 majority black districts in the state, which is going to have big implications for voters there.
And I was thinking, that's exactly right, and we're going to turn to the House races in a second. I was thinking, though, of governors who've used their office as a platform to the presidency. And the last 2 I could think of were Chris Christie in New Jersey and George W. Bush. When they had their races before they ran, they trounced their opponents. This will be different. DeSantis will have a tough and close race, and we'll see. Does that elevate him and make him stronger for the presidential if he decides to run, or does it soften him up as Democrats hope? All right, that's me talking. Now we got to get some results. We're going to check into these House races in Florida. So we're going to start with the Republican primary in the 27th district. And in this district, with 79% that have come in, Salazar has got 80% of the vote versus Frank Polo, who's got 19. So that looks like, we are in fact able to project that Elvira Salazar is in fact going to win in the 27th of Florida. Now, for the Democratic primary, Annette Taddeo is going to pull away on that. She is the projected winner there, handily, with 99% of the vote in. For the 28th in the Republican primary, Jimenez is 74% of the vote, or 75% of the vote is in. Carlos Jimenez has got that locked up. 28th on the Robert Asensio on the Democratic side has got 70% of the vote in projected winner in the 28th there. Now we have in the first, Matt Gaetz, 70% of the vote for somebody who's under federal investigation. Mark Lombardo, the business executive, had attacked him on morals grounds, and that didn't look like it did any good for him. Kaylin, your reaction to those House the results?
I mean, Matt Gaetz, you mentioned surviving. Voters are essentially saying that those investigations don't quite matter to them. He did bring in Trump supporters to come to Florida. The family campaigned for him, and he is someone who has been attacking, Republicans who haven't been aligned with Trump, and so that is a very interesting, to be able to survive a primary shows us a lot about kind of where the Republican Party is.
That 27th congressional district is perhaps the most competitive down there in South Florida. Maria Elvira Salazar, Annette Taddeo, former state senator who was running for governor briefly, realized that this was a better chance. Democrats saying they'll help her. If they can win back a spot like that, Democrats, then it's a really good night for them probably in November. The 28th also, where Carlos Jimenez, the former Miami mayor, is the incumbent, would be another potential battleground if things are going well for Democrats. But if Republicans hold on to both of those, it's probably also a good night for Ron DeSantis in South Florida.
We're now joined by Republican political analyst Leslie Sanchez and Democratic political contributor Joel Payne. Leslie, let me go to you first. Your reaction to the results we have so far tonight.
Republicans definitely like the trend line on that, John, and I kind of want to encapsulate the long historical lens of everything my colleagues have been saying. Voters in Florida have elected Republicans for the last 6 gubernatorial elections. On the last 3, we heard were too close to call, within 2 percentage points. But what Ron DeSantis is trying to do is show that the state of Florida is shading, the shade of it is a stronger, deeper red than it was before COVID. A lot of his policies taking place, limiting on vaccinations, wearing masks, opening businesses, opening schools. Those are getting very high marks from Republicans. And DeSantis is making the model, saying that Florida will no longer be that too close to call state. If he can prove that with what we're seeing the numbers today and leading into November, it changes the dynamic for Florida, not only as a southeastern state, but certainly on the political map and the road to the White House.
Joel, your thoughts about what we've heard so far tonight?
Well, I think there's been a lot of smart commentary put out there, but just kind of fanning back for a second. I see 2 things as a Democrat. One, everybody's right. Florida is a red state. It's trending red, particularly after COVID. It has trended even further red. And DeSantis does seem to have tapped into something in the state. However, Ron DeSantis is on the ballot, but also Dobbs is on the ballot. We've seen this in previous primaries this cycle. The kind of outsized role of women's reproductive rights. Florida is a bit of an oasis state for some states surrounding it in the southeastern corridor. It's got a 15-week abortion ban now. DeSantis has some tricky politics around that. Yes, this is a Republican state, but it is not necessarily per se an anti-abortion state. And I think abortion politics is going to trip up a lot of Republicans around the country, and DeSantis might be someone who falls into that trap. So that's the type of unpredictable thing that can play havoc in a situation politically like this. The other thing I would point out, political pros like me know Florida is a bit of a money pit. And by that, I mean, if you are a Democrat or a Republican running in that state, it is so expensive to run a competitive campaign. So if you're Marco Rubio running a tougher race against Val Demings than maybe you planned to 6 months ago, it not only, of course, makes you sweat, but it makes you spend money, and it makes national Republicans spend money. And if national Republicans spend money in Florida, they don't spend it in Georgia, they don't spend it in Arizona, in Michigan, and other places around the country. So I think that's an important thing to look at as we're thinking about what the role is of these big candidates in Florida going forward after the primary tonight.
Quite right. Although it's also sometimes a money pit for Democrats who get stars in their eyes about potentially big, giant killer elections and spend a lot of money, as they did in South Carolina and Kentucky in the last cycle, in big-time losing races where they nevertheless spent millions of dollars. So it'll be fascinating to see where the checks go with respect to Florida. Coming up, CBS News exclusive battleground tracker, and we'll check in with key New York State races. Stay with us.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
I identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
when weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back. I want to bring in Anthony Salvanto again with his CBS News House and Senate Battleground Tracker. So, Anthony, let's start with the House. What are you seeing?
Sure. You know, there's bigger context out of all this, John, is everybody expects, including us, at this point, if the election were held today, the Republicans would take the House. Now, what we think at this moment is that they'd get a slight majority if you actually go through district by district, as we've done, and compute what they would gain. Now, that's not historically quite the average number that an out party would be expected to get in a president's first midterm. So that's important. Can the Democrats maybe hold back those gains? And then the other part of this is the Senate, and some of that context is one of the things we're talking about tonight, John. When you look at the seats that are up, the Democrats have a real shot to hang on to control of the Senate. That makes overall the Senate a toss-up in our estimation. You see where Florida fits into that. It's a lean red in our estimation, but there's Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. Those are going to become household state names, if you will, because those are the races that are going to decide this, John.
Okay, Anthony Salvanto, thank you. And now we're going to go to CBS News congressional correspondent Scott Mcfarland, who joins us from New York City. He's been watching some of the primary matchups up there, where newly drawn congressional districts have caused infighting among Democrats. Scott, I've heard it referred to as musical chairs, the Hunger Games. It's the redistricting has caused a lot of confusion. What are you seeing up there?
Well, somebody is losing their seat at the end of this year because of the musical chairs. New York City, which is traditionally sluggish with tabulating votes, is actually moving at a good clip tonight. But as we await a projection in this New York 12th district, let's say what we know for certain. One New York Democratic powerhouse is going to lose his or her seat at the end of the year because it has two powerhouses, two 30-year incumbents, two committee chairs running against each other. Jerry Nadler, chair of the Judiciary Committee in the U.S. House, now facing off against his longtime colleague, the neighboring district representative, Carolyn Maloney. The Oversight Committee chair, both of them in this new New York 12th district, campaigning for the same nomination tonight. It was Jerry Nadler through the day, having public events scheduled, doing a series of media interviews. Ms. Maloney kept a lower profile here on Election Day, but as we await the results, we know for certain one of them is not coming back next year, the first time one of them won't be here in Washington since 1992. Let's go to the New York 10th district, where we see Dan Goldman, who served in the U.S. House as staffer, but as an attorney in the first Trump impeachment, a high-profile role. He's running in a wide-open Democratic field for the nomination for New York's 10th district, which grabs part of New York City as well. And he's running against, among others, an incumbent member of the U.S. House who moved to this district because of the redistricting, Mondaire Jones. Goldman, with the New York Times endorsement, is considered a late frontrunner. Mondaire Jones is in the 10th in part because of what's happening in the New York 17th district. Let's shift there. That's where Sean Patrick Maloney, the chair of the DCCC, the campaign chair for the Democratic Party to try to retain control of the House, quickly squatted on the New York 17th district as his own for this next election cycle. He is an overwhelming favorite in the primary tonight. It could be a very competitive general election for Mahoney, who took some grief from his fellow Democrats for so quickly moving to change districts, as he's also juggling this dual responsibility to prop up Democrats nationwide, including throughout New York in this cycle. But there's more than just primaries on the ballot here in New York tonight. There's a special election in the New York 19th district. This is a huge swath of land in the Hudson Valley near the Catskill Mountains, about 2 hours north of New York City. This is a special election to fill the final months of a now vacant U.S. House seat, which was previously held by the new Lieutenant Governor of New York. It's been a competitive race throughout. The Democrat is Patrick Ryan. He's the Ulster County executive, running against the Republican nominee, who's the Dutchess County executive from the other side of the Hudson River. The Republicans trying to press inflation as his key issue. The Democrat trying to press abortion rights as his key issue. This is the first competitive head-to-head congressional race since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. So everyone, John, is watching the results of this test case tonight.
Scott Mcfarland in New York for us. Thank you, Scott. Ed, you pick any one of those four. A lot to say.
Well, there's a lot here. First of all, Scott's not standing in front of Lincoln Center because he's seeing a show. He's there because that's the district where this Maloney-Nadler race is happening. They've redrawn Manhattan as part of this court-order redistricting. This is perhaps the biggest example of Democrats screwing up a redraw this year. And it's going to cost the party potentially 4, maybe 5 seats on a bad night in November.
And when they first drew the seats before the court threw them out, they thought they'd pick up 4 seats.
Exactly, and that's part of the problem, is the judge said you overdid it. You overplayed your hand. We're sending this to an independent arbiter who's going to redraw the lines. And he took a district in Manhattan that basically split the Upper West Side from the Upper East Side, put them together and said, Nadler, Maloney, you got to run against each other. It's a huge loss for Democrats and emblematic of a big northeastern state losing seats, losing clout, and one of these two being sent home.
And I would note just quickly, I had a chance to speak with Jerry Nadler before the House recessed. And, this isn't easy for either of these candidates. What he pointed out to me is he's known Maloney for years, decades. And so it is very tough for them to go up against each other and potentially for one of them to lose, a powerful committee chairmanship or chairwomanship in the case of Congresswoman Maloney. But, that being said, you also have to look at just how much this has impacted all of these candidates. I had a chance earlier today to talk to former DCCC Chair Steve Israel, who, compared this race to having to root for the Mets versus the Yankees. I mean, that's really what's at stake. Which way do you
for some, that's easy. For some,
but, for others, me being from Los Angeles, it's hard to Dodgers, Angels, I mean, it is a tough decision, and voters made that clear today.
And someone's going to have a lot of time on their hands to go watch baseball. Nicole, thank you. Hold on a sec. We'll be right back as more votes keep coming in, and we'll have some new results shortly. So we'll also talk to 2 political experts from our local stations in Florida and New York to get their thoughts on tonight's races. So stick with us. We'll be back in a minute.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before. That's correct. Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back to our CBS News special report, America Decides, Campaign 22. It's 9:30 p.m. on the East Coast as we take a look at some of the latest results coming in to our election desk. And right now we can interrupt what I was about to tell you to say that CBS projects that Jerry Nadler is going to be the winner in New York 12. That's the House Republican primary in the 12th district. Democratic primary. There doesn't need to be a Republican one because it's a safe seat. So Jerry Nadler is going back to Washington. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney has been defeated and therefore will not return to Washington in the next Congress. Now, back to those other races we were talking about. One of the big winners this evening, or the projected winner, is Charlie Crist to run against Ron DeSantis, the incumbent Republican governor of Florida. Crist used to hold that post, and now he's going to try and win it again. Congresswoman Val Demings, with 95% of the vote in, CBS is projecting that she will be the winner. That puts her up against Marco Rubio, the incumbent Republican senator. And for a closer look at the races in Florida, let's bring in Jim DeFede, who I think is with us. There he is. Jim, how are you?
I'm good, John. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. All right, so we now know what the terms of the contest will be. Let's talk about the governor's race. What's your expectation now in the DeSantis-Crist race?
Look, I think the first thing we got to recognize is that Charlie Crist's victory over Nikki Fried was a lot bigger than anyone had projected. I talked to the Crist campaign, and they were confident that they were going to win, but they thought they had a 10 to 12 point advantage according to their internal polling. They won by 25 points. And I think the overall sentiment among Democrats down here was, I don't know that they necessarily love Charlie Crist, but I think they made the choice based on who they thought had the best chance of beating Ron DeSantis. It was really an electability issue from the voters I spoke to. So looking ahead to that race, look, that is a buzzsaw. Charlie Crist gets one night to celebrate winning the Democratic primary, and now he gets to less than 80 days go up against Ron DeSantis, who has $130 million in the bank. You know, he is a divisive figure, but he's also a popular figure and draws very ardent support among Republicans and some independents here in Florida. Charlie Crist is going to have to hit the ground running. And as we saw in his victory speech tonight, he came out throwing haymakers at Governor Desantis, essentially likening him to being an anti-Semite and just going after him with tongs. You know, which is unusual for Charlie Crist, who's known for civility. But, you know, if that's a harbinger of things to come, this is going to be a nasty fight.
Well, and thank you, Jim, for setting up the soundbite. We're now going to hear some of what Charlie Crist had to say and hear a little bit of that haymaking.
He's abusive. He is the bully. He is the bully. And he's dangerous. He is dangerous. He imitates the worst authoritarian leaders on the globe.
So there you go. That's what you were talking about. Let me ask you this also, Jim. I was struck by, and explain this to somebody who doesn't live in Florida, one of the interesting things that Desantis has done is spend all this time endorsing local school board candidates. What is that about? Is that about this gubernatorial race, or is there also some structure building here for his presidential aspirations?
I think what it is look, there were very few organizations that stood in the way of Ron DeSantis or defied him. The Republicans in the state Senate, the Republicans in the state legislature, they cowered and caved to everything Ron DeSantis wanted. One of the few groups that did not during the pandemic were local school boards. When Ron DeSantis was demanding that schools be open, that mask mandates be dropped, school boards throughout the state held firm and defied the governor. The governor does not like to be defied, and so he got involved in at least 10 different school board races across the state. And I can tell you that here in Miami-Dade County, you know, he went after longtime Republicans serving on those school boards who did not show enough fealty to him, and they are out tonight. There are at least 2 school board members that he was able to take out, including one who served for some 24 years in office and had the backing of Jeb Bush and others and tried to promote herself as being a conservative, but Ron DeSantis came in and crushed that. I'm not sure it's as much about the national race, although certainly education and what he's doing for what he claims to be doing for parents and schools in terms of parental rights is a keystone for him. I think this was a lot about Ron DeSantis settling some scores from over the past couple of years for those who defied him.
All right, Jim DeFede, thank you so much for that local insight. And now we're going to take a look at the New York local scene. Let's bring in WCBS's TV political reporter Marcia Kramer. Marcia, Democratic Jerry Nadler has won that tough race against Representative Carolyn Maloney, and he won quite handily. What do you think was the turning point, and are you surprised by how big his margin of victory was?
Well, I think that there's several things that are factors here. One, not only is it a victory for Jerry Nadler, it's also a victory, believe it or not, for Chuck Schumer, who was one of the few people in the New York delegation to actually take a side. He endorsed Nadler early, and Nadler also got the endorsement of the New York Times, which was also a very important endorsement on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. But you have to also understand that in the Upper West Side, they really take voting seriously as anybody's taking it this summer, and a lot of people turned out to vote. I also think that another factor was the way they drew the line so late in the race. It didn't give the candidates enough time to make their cases. So I think it's a big win for Nadler, certainly, but it's also a big win for others. But, you know, you have to take a look at what's happening here in New York, where, you know, we lost Carolyn Maloney, which was a very big power broker. And there's also a possibility that Mondaire Jones, who was forced to run in the 10th district, could lose the race as well. Right now, Dan Goldman is ahead by a couple percentage points against Uline New. Mondaire Jones is about third, and that's with 86% of the vote being counted. So the fact that New York is going to lose both clout and experience in Washington can really hurt New York, especially the governor and the mayor, who are going to be looking to Washington for a lot of money for a lot of things, not only mass transit and building those tunnels under the Hudson River, but now with the influx of migrants coming into New York from Texas, there's a big ask. They want at least $300 million from the federal government to help house, feed, and clothe these influx of asylum seekers. That's going to be a really big deal. Also, I would point out to you that there are a number of other congressmen who are facing tough races, and we could end up with a lot less of Democrats in New York, which would affect whether there's actually going to be the Democrats controlling the House or the Republicans controlling the House come January. And I want to tell you that I think that this was a self-inflicted wound. The Democrats in the legislature threw out a decision that was made by an independent, nonpartisan redistricting commission, and instead, because they were trying to help Nancy Pelosi, did this amazing thing where before redistricting, there were 19 Democrats and 8 Republicans. After redistricting and after New York lost 1 seat, they wanted to have 22 Democrats and just 4 Republicans. And some of the things were so blatant that the courts just ruled against them and said it was gerrymandering.
Self-inflicted wound, well put. Marsha Kramer, thank you so much. And we will be right back with a look at the shifting Hispanic vote and its impact on key races in tonight's primary and heading into the midterm. Stay with us.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail. We're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back. I want to bring in CBS News correspondent Enrique Acevedo as we take a look at the shifting Hispanic vote and how it's impacting both local and national elections, particularly in Florida. Enrique?
Hi, John. Two things caught my attention tonight at this event here in Florida. First, the fact that the name Donald Trump was not mentioned in all the speeches we heard tonight. We heard from Governor Desantis, from Senator Marco Rubio, from Representatives Mario Diaz-Balart and Maria Elvira Salazar. None of them mentioned Donald Trump. That would have been unthinkable, a political event of this caliber back in 2016, 2020, without mentioning the name Donald Trump. The other thing that I thought was notable is the location they chose for this event. We're in Hialeah, Florida. This is the heart of the Cuban-American community here in South Florida. Actually, the heart of the Cuban-American community in the country, and a city that's been described as the most conservative city in Florida, a city that's always voted heavily for Republican candidates. And that means two things, according to Representative Diaz-Balart, who I spoke to earlier tonight. First, that they're not taking anything for granted, despite the fact that the state has been trending red, like it's been said throughout the night in the past couple of election cycles. But the other thing that says is the importance of the Latino vote here in South Florida. 4.7 million people live in this region, and 2.5 million of them are Latinos. So this is a crucial constituency for any candidate. The road to the governor's mansion, the road to the Senate here in Florida goes through El Barrio. And the candidates know this, and they want that important base for Republicans to come out in full force in November. One thing that's being said in the last couple of months is this apparent shift from Latino voters to the right, and how the Republican Party is trying to capitalize that. And when we ask people what are the driving factors behind that apparent shift, they point to country of origin as an important factor. Of course, U.S. policy towards Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. And the other important factor is identity politics. Tonight, Senator Rubio asked the crowd to raise their hand if they identify themselves as Latinx. No one did. And this is something that we talked about with the mayor of the city of Miami, Francis Suarez, earlier also today, and this is what he had to say about it.
Number one, we fundamentally love this country. And I think, Republicans oftentimes are pro-America. And it seems like sometimes the Democrats have this sort of love-hate relationship with our country. And I think that resonates with Hispanics. Number two, I think, unfortunately for Democrats, they've been characterizing Hispanics monolithically, right, with this Latinx term, which I don't think has resonated with Hispanics, who are very varied, as you know. It come from a variety of different countries and respect the uniqueness of their individual Hispanic cultures.
Over 2/3 of all the Latino eligible voters in this country are U.S. born. That means they're going to start behaving more and more like the rest of the electorate, and Florida certainly looks to be the case. John.
All right, Enrique Acevedo from Hialeah. Thank you, Enrique. Let's talk here at the table about this. Ed, give me your sense of this shift and where it comes from. Why?
Well, I think Enrique just said it there at the end. You're talking now about second or third generation Latinos who live all across the country, who are mimicking sort of the rest of the electorate, depending on where they are, what they do for a living, what religion they believe. It's about more than just ethnicity. And we have been saying, those of us who are Latino, who know the culture, know the community best, have been saying for years to colleagues and to consultants and others, Latinos are not a monolith. Unlike other segments of the voting population, given geography, given country of origin, given religiosity or the lack of it, depending on the family, they're going to vote very differently. Republicans in Florida have incredibly effectively captured them down there by raising concerns since the beginning of the Trump administration about socialism and Marxism among Democrats. All that talk that you hear nationwide now began in South Florida because they understood that even on the margins, if you could just get a few of them to switch sides, you would win South Florida and you'd win Florida. And it's working incredibly effectively now at the national level.
Leslie Sanchez, I'd like to bring you in on this question, picking up on what Ed said. So if Republicans have been successful in Florida, what's your sense of other states thinking either in terms of these midterms or in terms of the presidential vote, where Democrats should be particularly worried about inroads with Hispanic voters?
What's striking about it is something that we saw a little bit earlier in this broadcast, is talking about Republicans are now at about 46% support in the state of Florida. There's been a long line of research that if Republicans can top 35.5% on a statewide level, they can win statewide elections by that Hispanic support. So if you see Hispanics uptick in the high 30s, mid 40s in Florida, certainly in places like Texas, but go on to Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, the western mountainous states, Republicans can remain competitive. They don't need to win the 51.5% Latino vote. They need to just get up in those high numbers, and they can win national elections.
And then just quickly, just on the macro level, certainly we know that Republicans have been trying to make inroads with the Latino community because they feel that, especially when it comes to issues of the economy, those working class values, that their message resonates. And notable that Ronna McDaniel, the chair of the RNC, mentioned the fact that they have opened a number of community centers in Hispanic communities. They've done the same in Black communities, and that is a strategy we have seen Republicans doing. Democrats saying they don't take that for granted, and also making investments in terms of recent ad buy to promote, President Biden signing the Inflation Reduction Act, making sure that appears in Spanish language media in Florida. Very briefly on the micro level, I would just say that, you heard Enrique talk about the significance of Hialeah, Florida being a Cuban American community. Well, Val Demings just tonight announcing that she will launch a bus tour to Tampa because she will be targeting Hispanic voters there, particularly Puerto Ricans. We know there's a strong Puerto Rican community there in Tampa. Marco Rubio, of course, down in Hialeah. So again, we're already seeing that battle shape up on the micro level as well.
Right. And Joel Payne, weigh in here on your thoughts with respect to the Hispanic vote, which, after we've all discussed about how you don't want to talk about it as a monolith, I'm now going to ask you a question that treats the Hispanic vote as a monolith. So fix that problem. But then also, how do Democrats address this threat?
Well, I just want to pick up on what you and DeFede were talking about earlier. You talked about the language that Charlie Crist used in his acceptance speech this evening for the nomination. He talked about how Ron DeSantis was acting essentially like a strongman. He was very much dog whistling to those concerns that Republicans have done such a good job of taking advantage of in recent elections. I think you're going to see Crist and folks like Val Demings maybe try to turn the wheel a bit on that and maybe put DeSantis and Republicans back on their heels on that issue. It'll be interesting to see if it works. I think it's a long shot, but it certainly jumped out to me as some interesting language that they decided to use this evening.
You mean because Latino voters would recognize what strong men are like, and therefore, just as when Republicans say socialist.
That's right. I think he used the term authoritarian. He's acting like an authoritarian figure, which is very loaded language for somebody in those communities in Florida, coming from some of the communities they come from in some of their countries of origin.
Especially when it's translated into Spanish language news tonight and tomorrow morning. I mean, the voters, they'll hear that.
They'll know what's being said. All right. Thank you for decoding that for us. And coming up, we'll have a check on a key race in New York. Stay with us.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, and sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before. That's correct. Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
when weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail. We're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back. I've been dying to get back to those New York races, and we're going to take a look at the New York 19th congressional district. Democrat Pat Ryan holds a large lead. 44% of the vote is in, so be careful. Large lead over Republican Mark Molinaro in the Republican-leading district. This race was getting a lot of national attention as a possible bellwether going into the midterms, and we're going to bring in congressional correspondent Scott Mcfarland to explain why it's being looked at as a bellwether. Scott?
Yeah, this would otherwise be a sleepy race in the Hudson Valley of New York to fill a vacant seat just for a few months in the U.S. House. But it's attracted all this outside money and attention and energy because it's the first congressional race head-to-head since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, a possible last test case before the November election in 77 days, and abortion rights have been a prominent issue. Democrats think if they keep this close or win this seat, it will infuse the party, John, with energy and possibly donations ahead of the midterms.
All right, Scott Mcfarland, thank you. I'm going to go now to Anthony Salvanto, our CBS News Elections and Surveys Director. Anthony, give me a little class here. 44% of the vote is in, and one of the candidates has 67% of the vote. The other has 32% of the vote. How should I read that?
You should read that as we're not projecting it yet because we're not certain that all of that includes election day vote. We think it's a lot of absentee vote, and what we have seen is that Democrats tend to vote more by mail and Republicans show up in droves on Election Day. So depending on what kind of vote it is, this race could get a lot tighter. I suspect it probably will. Yes, it's a lead now for the Democrat, but let's see when we get more Election Day counted, John.
Caitlin, you were in Kansas for the abortion vote there. Give us your quick take on the possibility of abortion playing a role in this race?
Well, the question has been what happened in Kansas. Is it transferable to races where candidates are on the ballot? In Kansas, it was a direct question about abortion rights. And talking to voters, that's what drove them to the polls. These candidates are trying to figure out, the Democratic candidate is trying to figure out if he campaigns on that issue, does that mean that you vote for the Democrat? That remains to be seen, and especially in a state where abortion rights really aren't in huge jeopardy. Now, they could be at a national level, and that's the argument Democrats want to make. But Molinaro, the Republican in this race, really hasn't been engaging the issue, which shows you a lot about Republican Party politics in these tight races where they don't want to be harping on abortion. They want to focus on the economy.
And he's not likely to bring it up now. Yeah. We'll be right back. We're going to take a look at a number of election deniers who are running for office, and if they win, the role they can play in 2024 in the presidential election that year. Stay with us.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before. That's correct. Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back to our CBS News special report, America Decides, Campaign 22. It's 10 o'clock on the East Coast as we take a look at some of the latest results coming into our election desk. Florida Governor Charlie Crist wins the Democratic primary. That means he'll go up against Ron Desantis in Florida. It's a job that Crist once had before. He's going to try and win it again. Val Demings, Congresswoman from Florida, is now going to be going up against Marco Rubio for the Senate seat in that state. She won handily. And now in New York. This was the battle of two House committee chairmen and a chairwoman. Jerry Nadler has won by a pretty significant margin over Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. He will return to the next Congress. Carolyn Maloney will not. And finally, at least for this portion of our evening, in New York 10, Dan Goldman looks like he's got 25% of the vote. 89% of the vote is in. Mondaire Jones is the incumbent there, is in third place. And it looks like it's gotten a little bit closer there for Goldman, but it was essentially a race between Goldman and then the progressives, who appear to have chopped up their vote. And he is at the moment ahead. But again, 89% of the vote in, so we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. The polarization of voters has moved parties away from the center and more towards the ideological extremes. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but that means ever more campaigns are about mobilizing supporters and nobody's being persuaded. Some parties talk about one set of issues, another party talks about another set, and you'd think they were in different countries. Anthony Salvanto joins us now to discuss what this means for the campaign we're going to see over the next 77 days. Anthony?
Hey, John, I want to show you how polarization isn't just differences over policy, but it's often about what you think of the other side. In fact, the people on the other side, not just the politicians. Take a look at this. When we ask Democrats what you think of Republicans, are they political opposition? Well, 4 in 10 say they are, but a majority of 58 say they feel like they're enemies who threaten their whole way of life. And this is not confined to the Democrats, John. Let me show you this. Among Republicans, it's just about the same, where a majority feel like Democrats are enemies, threatening their way of life. I would add this. Among the more ideological, as you pointed out, and specifically now among Republicans who identify themselves as MAGA, these are the most ardent Trump supporters. Look at how this number rises to 70% that think of Democrats as enemies. What does this do for a campaign? One, it means that candidates are talking about how bad the other side is, sometimes more than talking about what they would do as policy. And secondly, maybe it starts to erode those democratic norms because you think, well, if the other side's threatening my way of life, I got to do anything in order to preserve it, John.
Thank you, Anthony. Ed, this seems to connect with the massive number of election deniers on the Republican side, because if you've defined the opposition as evil, well, of course, evil people they're going to do anything. And in fact, they're going to steal an election. So it seems consistent. Do you buy that line of argument that I've just thrown on the table?
I mean, look, the former president has endorsed more than 200 candidates across the country. The overwhelming majority of them essentially stand with him on the idea that the election was stolen or that Joe Biden shouldn't be considered the legitimately elected president. It works in those districts. Most of these are congressional candidates. So in deep ruby red districts where there's no blue opponent of any real note, you can get away with that. I think that the bigger concern or the question will be this November, do you tolerate somebody who's running for Secretary of State or Attorney General or Governor who feels that way? And can that person win or lose? And if they don't, what does that say about Trump-style politics and this idea? Look at this. 127 of these election deniers have won their primary. 16 have lost. 16 are still in the midst of upcoming primaries. That's a tally by the New York Times. It's done a little differently by each news organization, depending on how far down the ballot you want to go. If even half of these people win, I mean, what does that say about truth, about the future of belief in democracy and democratic norms? Lowercase d democratic norms.
And your mention, too, of not just congressional candidates, but secretaries of state and governors. I mean, in Pennsylvania, for example, you have the Republican nominee who, if elected, will choose the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania, a top election denier. And we're already seeing that have an effect in terms of policy. I mean, look at Florida. Florida was a place where the election was done really well in 2020. They had learned lessons from the past 20 years. And even still, they implemented voter changes to election law, making clear that that's something that, even though Donald Trump won the state by 3 points, even though the elections were run very smoothly there, Desantis and Republicans there felt like they needed to push that message.
I want to bring Robert Costa in because he pays such close attention to the Republican Party and its fibrillations. So, Bob, if you want to be successful in Republican politics, do you have to deny that that Joe Biden is the rightfully elected president?
Depends on which part of the country you're in, how the Republican Party looks in that area. Robert Draper of the New York Times had a great piece of reporting recently about how the Arizona Republican Party has changed, and we're seeing a lot of different state parties convulse in recent years as they move in some respects toward this election denial of President Biden. But the Trump factor is a two-front question politically. On one part of it is former President Trump himself, and the other part of it's Trumpism. So the ethos, the policies, the ideas of Trump continue to permeate the Republican Party. But Trump himself, as a political figure, remains a little bit of a separate issue than Trumpism inside the Republican Party. And that Trump himself question is one that has a lot of uncertainty over it. I'm standing just a few feet now from Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate here in Palm Beach, Florida tonight. And this is an estate that has become the center of the political world in recent weeks following that FBI search earlier this month. And everything that's happening tonight in New York, in Florida, in Oklahoma, and in upcoming primaries, yes, it's about Republicans and Democrats, but there's also about where does this Republican Party, with Trump as its standard bearer, go? There's so much uncertainty facing the probe about his handling of classified documents, as well as the Fulton County, Georgia grand jury, the New York State investigations at both a state level and at the Manhattan District Attorney level, and of course the January 6th investigation. All of these investigations hover over the midterm elections and these primary races as issues like grievance bubble up inside the Republican Party and issues of accountability about Trump's conduct.
Nicole, what do you think this means for a Senate or a House in which Republicans have control if a number of Republicans who are coming to Washington are supporting this idea that the election was stolen? Because that's an extra brand of partisan behavior that's different than what we've seen before.
Well, I think it makes for an even more polarized Congress, and we've seen a number of lawmakers retire because they're just fed up and with the system and fed up with some of their colleagues who didn't want to accept the results of the 2020 election. And I think that's one of the things to watch going forward is kind of this next frontier. I think especially coming on the heels of Liz Cheney's loss, for instance, last week. Yes, she lost to Harriet Hagman, who is someone who has expressed skepticism about the 2020 election. But at the same time, we know that she started this pact called the Great Task. And yes, while she may be considering a presidential run, she has also vowed to fight against these types of candidates, as has Adam Kinzinger, who also set up a similar organization. So I think certainly that is a dynamic to watch as well.
Leslie Sanchez, Mitch McConnell, apparently, according to reporting today, said that democracy is not under threat. It took a test on the 6th of January, but it held. And the idea that democracy is under threat that's not the case. But you have so many election deniers, and it is a litmus test in the Republican Party for those who would like to get ahead, that they either have to say the election was stolen or play footsie with the idea. How do you think this gets worked out?
It's going to be hard to see. I think Caitlin just mentioned the point particularly about Florida and Desantis in Florida, and you have candidates who are following that model where they thread this needle, where they don't sound like election deniers, but they are gaining support from many individuals who still question the authenticity of those election results. And that's going to continue to be the friction within the Republican Party for a while. Adding to that is in 2018 and certainly in 2022, you saw a lot of the centrist, in 2018 more Republican and certainly now more Democrats, the bargaining members of Congress who crossed the aisle that harken back to another time and era. Those were a lot of the retirements. So with that increased polarization and the potential increase in a lot of election deniers coming to Congress, packing their bags and, walking the halls of Congress, it's going to create a very new dynamic. But Republicans will come back and say real quickly is that this is a longstanding thing that is just not tied to Trump. It is the Tea Party movement, the Freedom Caucus. It's been going for many election cycles, and now they actually have candidates who can champion those causes. And that's why it's still going to be a test for the GOP where that lands.
Leslie, let's say after November, you've got a bunch of ultra-conservative, election-denying Republicans elected to the House, but you've seen a bunch of election-denying, ultra-conservative statewide candidates lose governors, attorneys general, and Senate races in key states across the country. How does the party go into the 2024 cycle with that dynamic? Do we just have another round of, somebody who's trying to run to the middle versus those on the right? Or is this the cycle that finally breaks that and Republicans go, gosh, if we ever want to win the White House again, we got to go find somebody who's a little more centrist?
I don't see them going that way, Ed. Not at all. I think that's a lot of what the establishment Republicans, the base Republicans have been arguing about, the sensibility of coming together and having that. Those candidates are having a really hard time getting out of the primary. Republican, this conservative populist party right now wants to see fighters. They want to see people tackle public and private institutions. And they very much say they liked those policies of Donald Trump, not only domestically, but internationally. They want to see more candidates kind of champion those causes, but they don't want all of the aftermath, everything that comes with Trump himself. And I think that's what we're starting to hear more about is people moving away from that, looking at those policies and everything from parental rights to border security. They want to see strong stance and legislation moved in that direction, that all of it aimed at the economy and keeping the economy strong.
Joel Payne, I want to bring you in quickly here. Dan Goldman is basically arguing that if he wins, democracy is on the ballot, and that's been part of his argument for why he should be elected. Do you think that has more broad appeal for Democratic candidates in close districts or in tight Senate races to make that a part of their campaign pitch, that you got to keep Democrats in control of the House of Congress because Republicans are a threat to democracy?
Well, look, we've seen in recent national polling that threats to democracy have started to rise to the top of the heap for voters as a main concern. I'm not sure in that local election that Dan Goldman is running in. I'm not really sure what the issues are at play there. I mean, I think you nailed it earlier when you said the progressives kind of split their vote there. So I think that might just be a measure of kind of political good fortune for him. Can I just say one thing really quickly? I think that political gravity does not favor running the last election, okay? If you're a Republican in an environment where you should be winning very easily across the country because the economy's been struggling, Joe Biden's been struggling, and you have these Senate races that are toss-ups, that shouldn't be toss-ups, that would concern me because as a Republican, I'm not signaling to my electorate or voters in the middle that I have anything new to say to them. I am running the same race that was run in 2020, and political gravity does not favor that as a political strategy.
All right, Joel Payne, we're now going to get a projection here. CBS News can now project Sean Patrick Maloney has won the Democratic primary in New York's 17th district. Maloney has beaten Alessandra Biaggi, and rather handily. This was maybe not shaping up, but some people thought it might be shaping up as a kind of establishment Democrat versus a progressive candidate. It didn't really. With 62% of the vote, CBS is projecting Maloney as the winner here. Let's bring back in congressional correspondent Scott Mcfarland. Scott, what do you make of New York 17 and this result?
Yeah, Sean Patrick Maloney was the overwhelming favorite to win this primary. Democrats with whom I spoke today acknowledged this could be a tight general election, but it's been the focus for several months now because of what Sean Patrick Maloney did in advance of the primary. When New York redrew the map and settled on a final map, Maloney sped to the new New York 17th district, announced he was going to run there, and ruffled some feathers because he has a dual responsibility, not only to get reelected, but he chairs the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which is charged with getting as many Democrats elected as possible, and he boxed out at least one of his fellow New York Democrats to run in the 17th. That's what we've seen in other states. Illinois, West Virginia, now New York. These redrawn districts that foster intra-party primaries. Foster primaries that are divisive, unpredictable, and sometimes downright ugly. That's what we're seeing the results of tonight here in New York, John.
Ed O'Keefe, let's pause for a moment here and talk about the New York, how New York Democrats, let's kind of tally up what they've done to themselves here, because in this case, Maloney's victory, it's great for him, but he bruised some people here, and his job is getting Democrats elected and making everybody comfortable and happy so they can have a big bunch of victories.
Without confusing people outside of New York, there was a district to his north that he actually lives in that many argue he should have run in to leave it open for one of the next generation of the Democratic Party, especially in New York. There's a handful of younger, minority, LGBTQ, women who have all been seeking higher office, trying to get out of the state Senate and the Assembly to run for Congress, to run for mayor, a handful of them tonight in these crowded primaries who are not going to prevail. And there will be an argument made that the botched redistricting, the ambition of a certain handful that maybe could have run elsewhere or retired is costing the party its future, because there are a lot of people sitting on the bench in the New York area who wanted to run and who aren't going to make it. And it speaks to the problem they have across the country. Remember, we've talked about this in past cycles. You got to find younger, more reflective candidates to match the party's base, and they're not doing that necessarily tonight in New York.
All right, we're going to be right back with more results. Stick with us.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before. That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Former President Donald Trump isn't on the ballot, but he hangs over these elections. President Trump remains in the headlines due to the whole host of investigations into his conduct in and out of office. Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa, I want to bring him in. Bob, let me run this theory by you, which I've seen batted about, which is that President Trump, when he is seen to be attacked by whether it's the press or the FBI, or he is in a position of being the victim, that changes the dynamic of support for him within the party. And what do you make of that as a political ramification of this most recent tussle with the FBI?
John, that's been generally true in recent years. I would agree with that assessment, but we are in a different moment inside the Republican Party, and tonight is an indication of that. Just look at what's happening down the road near Miami, Florida tonight. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis giving a victory speech. Wasn't opposed in his primary for the gubernatorial nomination here in Florida, but he is someone who's gaining political capital inside the Republican Party, traveling the country. So is Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. So are so many other possible contenders for 2024. So while Trump is facing legal challenges and rallying his base, you do see other Republicans saying to themselves and their aides and their donors, we're still going to be part of this conversation. Just in recent days, former Vice President Mike Pence in Iowa, in New Hampshire, they're all looking down the road and saying, yes, Trump is probably still the standard bearer for many of the core voters in the Republican Party, but he's not the only person on this political map. They want to be part of this conversation, even if those same dynamics you outlined continue to persist inside the GOP.
Let me ask you this then, Bob. You're in Florida. You have a governor and one of his constituents who are both the constituents and the candidates. I mean, you've got DeSantis and Trump both in Florida. How is that neighborhood going to work its way out here in the next few months? I mean, how do you see this? How do you see this going? And what is Donald Trump? A lot of people talk about Desantis as kind of Trump without all the baggage, which I'm sure doesn't delight former President Trump.
John, the insider conversation in the Republican Party about the dynamic, the tension between Governor DeSantis and former President Trump comes down to an issue that's not often discussed in the day-to-day news. It's DeSantis's position on vaccines. Governor DeSantis is seen as someone by many conservatives who is more favorable to their position of having a little bit more autonomy when it comes to vaccination policy. This has really appealed to that right-wing element in the Republican Party, the so-called anti-vax wing. And DeSantis, because of his position on that, has won a lot of support in that wing.
All right, Robert Costa for us in the Sunshine State. I want to go back to Anthony Salvanto as we wrap up the evening here for final thoughts. Anthony, what do you got?
I wanted to add on to what we talked about, polarization and partisanship, John, in this way. In the state of New York, you might see 4 or 5 competitive congressional districts. In the state of Florida, you might see 1. Now, that's not a lot, considering how many congressional districts there are in these 2 really populated states. Part of that is due to gerrymandering, part of that is due to redistricting, but part of that is also due to partisanship. The candidates you're seeing tonight are by and large going to go on to win safe seats because there are Republicans and Democrats in both of those who are going to vote for that party. And that's how these elections have become nationalized, but that's where it starts with people, all this partisanship and polarization that we talk about.
Thank you, Anthony. Caitlin, your last thoughts for
I want to highlight a race that's going to make us all feel very old, so apologize for that. But this Florida 10th district race, Maxwell Frost, remember that name because he has won the Democratic primary in that district. He's going to be, that is likely a Democratic district. It leans very heavily Democratic. He's going to be the first Gen Z candidate, so younger than we've seen
almost
before.
Lost the letters in the alphabet.
Yes,
just
exactly.
hanging on right there at the end. That's Val Deming's district?
That's Val Deming's district. He won that with the support of a ton of progressive groups. You had Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. So that's, we've been talking about a lot of these moderates winning against progressives. This is kind of a flip of that dynamic and also going to make history, likely.
Wow. Nicole, your thoughts for the evening.
I think it's about looking ahead to the midterm messaging. You'll have House Republicans rolling out their commitment to America, which is modeled after the contract with America. Newt Gingrich, of course, we know Kevin McCarthy really angling to be speaker. On the Democratic side, we'll see Democrats, of course, really try to promote their recent successes in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act. We're expecting an announcement tomorrow on student loan debt forgiveness. So expect Democrats to really push that type of messaging. As we know, the president will be having a rally in Maryland later this week. Former President Obama getting into the game next week with a fundraiser. So we're already off to the races, and it's not even Labor Day.
And speaking of student loans, we are expecting the president's decision tomorrow. What does he decide? How does that help or hurt turnout among Democratic base voters, among them the young, who've been waiting for some kind of big signal from the president that he's either forgiving a lot of their debt or he's not, and they're going to have to start paying back at some point soon.
And does it ignite an inflation conversation, which Democrats don't want to be talking about at all?
It's not a good decision for him either way.
Tricky. Excellent. Thanks to all of you tonight. Our coverage will continue here on CBS News, streaming your local news, and tomorrow on CBS Mornings. Thank you to all our correspondents and contributors. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm John Dickerson in Washington. Thank you for being with us.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before. That's correct. Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays